I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture a world surrounded by fortresses. But these aren't made of stone. They're made of sheer rock and ice.
We're talking about a huge, elevated landmass, the Iranian plateau,
Yeah.
and it's isolated by nature itself.
To the north, you've got the Elborz Mountains, just these impossible heights. To the west, the Zagros, which is like a 1,000-mile spine separating it from Mesopotamia.
And then to the east, the Hindu Kush and the Pamirs, these icy frontiers.
Yeah.
And in between all of it.
Just miles and miles of salt desert, the Dasht-e-Kavir. It's here in this incredible isolation that one of history's greatest underdog stories begins.
It's a geography that just breeds self-reliance, you know? For centuries, while all the big powers, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, are just constantly fighting over the Fertile Crescent, something else is brewing on this plateau.
Quietly, almost in secret.
Exactly. A group of tribes who seem like minor players are developing this powerful, this really revolutionary worldview. And one day, it's just going to explode out from these mountains and completely change the world.
Yes. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace that incredible journey. We're going right to the origins of the Achaemenid Persian Empire.
We'll follow the thread from its spiritual foundations, Zoroastrianism, all the way to the conquests, and really the merciful rule of one of history's most amazing leaders, Cyrus the Great.
But first, we have to deal with the name, the whole Persia thing.
Yes, we absolutely have to start there because it's a huge point of confusion and it sort of misrepresents the people we're talking about. We say Persia, but that's not what they called it.
Right. For something like 3,000 years, they called their land Iran.
Iran, which just means land of the Aryans.
And we have to be really careful with that word Aryan because it comes with so much baggage today.
A huge amount. And it's critical to understand that for them, in antiquity, it had nothing to do with race. Arya was about a shared linguistic and cultural identity. It came from a root word that meant noble or honorable.
So it was a way of identifying the tribes that spoke Indo-Iranian languages. It was about shared heritage, not the hateful ideologies of the 20th century.
Not at all. It was about being of good origin, noble in spirit.
So if the land was Iran, the noble land, why on earth do we all call it Persia?
For that, we can thank the Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe blame them.
Ha, right.
They first ran into this civilization not at its core, but through its southwestern province.
The province of Pars or Persis.
Exactly. So when Greek writers like Herodotus saw this powerful dynasty coming out of Pars, they just named the whole empire after that one region. It's a classic case of mistaken identity.
It's like visiting Texas and deciding to call the entire United States the Texan Republic.
Precisely. And that Greek name just stuck. It stuck for over 2,000 years, to the point that in 1935, the Iranian government had to formally ask the world to please start using the correct name, Iran.
But still, that word Persia, it has this imaginative power, doesn't it? It conjures up all this imagery of Cyrus and Darius and the great kings.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
And the scale of what they achieved, it just demands that kind of epic name. The Achaemenid dynasty created something that had never been seen before. It stretched from the Aegean Sea all the way to the Indus River.
It was the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, by far. And get this, at its peak, it controlled about 40% of the entire world's population.
Think about that. Nearly half of all human beings on the planet were ruled by a single government.
Which brings us to the big question, the one that drives this whole story. How did a small group of pastoral nomads from the mountains achieve all of this? They weren't the Egyptians, they weren't the Babylonians.
They were outsiders. And the answer, as we're about to see, isn't found in their armies first. It's found in their unique, revolutionary spiritual foundation.
All right, let's get into that spiritual bedrock because it really was the engine for the entire empire. Before the armies, there was the religion of Zoroastrianism, and it all starts with the prophet Zarathustra.
Or Zoroaster, as the Greeks called him. And his timeline is, well, it's one of the most fascinating debates in ancient history.
We don't have a clear date for him.
Not at all. Some scholars push him way back to maybe 1500 BCE, which would make him one of the earliest prophets we know of, a contemporary of the Vedic peoples in India.
Wow, 1,000 years before the empire he inspired.
Right. But other, more traditional, dating puts him closer to 600 BCE, which would make him a contemporary of the early Persians.
But regardless of when he lived, his teachings were what mattered, and they were. They were utterly revolutionary.
They absolutely were. He introduced this idea of a cosmic dualism, a concept that just completely reshaped how people in that region thought about the divine. He said the entire universe is locked in this huge, eternal conflict.
A cosmic tug of war. So who are the two sides?
On one side, you have Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. He's the supreme, uncreated god, the source of all that is good, all light, all creation, all order.
The ultimate force for good.
And his opponent is Engromenyu, or Ahriman, the destructive spirit. He's the source of all evil, darkness, chaos, and this is key, lies. The lie, which they call Druj.
So it's not like a pantheon of gods who are sometimes good and sometimes bad. It's a clear moral choice.
That's the crucial distinction. Ahura Mazda is the one true god, but he has this powerful, intelligent adversary who is actively trying to destroy creation. The universe isn't morally gray. It's a battlefield between truth and the lie.
And the truth is called Asha.
Yes, Asha. It's more than just truth. It's cosmic order, righteousness, the divine law that holds the universe together. And that's what Ahura Mazda demands from humanity, to uphold Asha.
Which means that we as humans aren't just pawns in some divine game. We're soldiers.
Exactly. Every choice you make matters. Your good thoughts, good words, good deeds, they aren't just nice things to do. They are spiritual weapons.
So telling the truth, keeping your word, building something instead of destroying it, that's actively fighting on the side of Ahura Mazda.
You're literally pushing the universe towards the light. Your individual moral choices have eternal consequences.
And this worldview led to some incredible ideas that, well, they feel very familiar to us now. You can really see the influence on later Abrahamic faiths.
The parallels are striking. They developed this very clear idea of an afterlife with individual judgment. After you die, your soul goes to the Jinvat Bridge, the bridge of the separator.
The final exam.
That's a great way to put it. If your good deeds in life outweigh the bad, the bridge becomes wide and easy to cross, and you enter a paradise of eternal song.
But if you follow the lie,
the bridge narrows to the edge of a razor blade, and your soul falls into a cold, dark abyss. It's a very clear concept of heaven and hell based on your life's choices.
And it's not just about individual souls. They believed history itself was going somewhere. It had an endpoint.
Yes, eschatology. They believed in a final, decisive battle where Ahura Mazda would finally triumph over evil. There would be a resurrection of the dead, a final judgment, and a savior figure, the Saoshyant, would appear to help renew the world in perfection.
Resurrection, final judgment, a savior. I mean, it's just incredible how these core ideas were already there in Zoroastrianism, potentially centuries before they became central to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
And this is the worldview the Persian kings operated from. When they went out and conquered, they didn't just see it as grabbing land. They saw it as bringing Asha, cosmic order, to a world ruled by the chaos and lies, the Druj of petty tyrants.
Which seems like a paradox, because they're famous for their religious tolerance. How does a belief in one ultimate truth lead to tolerance of other faiths?
It's a direct connection. The Persian kings, in their inscriptions, are constantly invoking Ahura Mazda. They see their rule as the triumph of truth, but they believe that because Ahura Mazda created all good things, his truth could manifest in different ways in different cultures.
So if the Babylonians were worshipping their god Marduk in a way that promoted order and goodness,
then in the Persian view, they were ultimately honoring the wise lord, just under a different name. So long as a subject people maintained order and didn't rebel, their local traditions were protected. It was a deeply religious tolerance, not a secular one.
We should probably clear up that old misconception too, the whole fire worshippers label.
Right, that's a huge oversimplification. Fire was sacred to them, absolutely. But they didn't worship the fire itself.
It was a symbol.
The ultimate symbol. Fire was the purest physical element. It represented the light, the truth, and the righteousness of Ahura Mazda here on earth. So keeping an eternal flame burning in their temples was an act of profound devotion to the wise Lord.
And amazingly, that legacy has survived.
It has. The Parsis in India and Iran have kept some of those sacred fires burning for more than 1,000 years. It's a direct, living link back to the spiritual world that built this empire.
So to understand how this powerful ideology got to the Iranian plateau, we need to go back even further to around 2000 BCE. To a huge migration of people.
Yeah, this is one of the great prehistoric movements. Pastoral nomads, expert horsemen with bronze weapons started moving south from the steppes of Central Asia. We don't know exactly why, maybe climate change, maybe pressure from other tribes.
And they were carrying, like, the cultural seeds of two of the world's great civilizations.
Absolutely. They brought with them the early Indo-Iranian languages, which would eventually become Persian, Kurdish, and also Sanskrit in India. They had their chariots, their horses, their shared myths.
And this group of people split.
They did. One major branch went south onto the Indian subcontinent. They became the Vedic peoples, who gave us the Vedas and the foundations of Hinduism. The other branch, the one we're following, turned west onto the Iranian plateau.
And these were the ancestors of the Medes and the Persians.
Exactly. But for centuries, they were basically footnotes in history, just hill tribes. The real powers were the terrifying Assyrians, the ancient Egyptians, the learned Babylonians. The Medes and Persians were mostly just paying them tribute.
But that obscurity turned out to be a huge advantage, didn't it?
It was their invisibility cloak. While the great empires were just bleeding each other dry in endless wars, the future Persians were quietly getting stronger, learning and organizing. That quiet period of growth was the key to everything that came next.
And the first of these Iranian groups to really step onto the world stage were the Medes. They settled in the northwest, around modern-day Hamadan.
A region famous for its horses. The Nicaean horses were some of the best in the ancient world. But for a long, long time, the Medes were subjects of the Assyrian Empire.
And living under Assyrian rule was brutal. Their art is basically a celebration of torture and conquest.
Pyramids of heads, people being impaled. It was ruled by terror. But here's the critical part. The Medes learned from it. They were forced to live under this tyranny, but they absorbed everything. Assyrian military tactics, siege warfare, how to run a large state.
They were learning how to build an empire from the empire that was oppressing them.
Precisely. And their moment finally came in 614 BCE. The Assyrian Empire started to crumble from within.
The Babylonians rose up, led by Nabopolassar, but they needed help.
And they found it in the Medes under a king named Cyaxares. He had reorganized the Median army into a serious fighting force, spearmen, archers, and of course that incredible heavy cavalry.
And in 612 BCE, this alliance did the unthinkable. They took Nineveh.
This was an event that shook the world. Nineveh wasn't just a city, it was the symbol of Assyrian power, protected by these massive walls 100 feet high. A conventional siege was impossible.
So how did they do it?
Ancient sources say that a flood on the Tigris River actually weakened the foundations of the mud duck walls. That gave them the breach they needed.
And the destruction was total.
Complete and utter annihilation. They sacked Nineveh so thoroughly that the city was never rebuilt. It was lost to history for centuries, literally fulfilling the biblical prophecy that said, Nineveh is laid waste.
And with the Assyrians gone, the Medes created the first Iranian Empire. For about 60 years, they controlled the highlands from their capital at Ecbatana.
A city that was said to have 7 concentric walls, each painted a different color. They established the tradition of kingship and administration that the Persians would inherit, and, well, perfect.
Which brings us to the moment the Median story crashes headlong into the story of the man who would eclipse them. We have to get into the origin story of Cyrus the Great, and it's pure cinema.
It really is. As told by Herodotus, it all begins with the paranoid Median king, Astyages.
And his dreams. He had these 2 terrifying dreams about his daughter, Mandane.
The first dream was a vision of catastrophe. He dreamt that Mandane urinated, and the flood was so great it washed over his capital and all of Asia.
Not subtle.
Not at all. He called in his magi, his dream interpreters, and they told him, your grandson will overthrow you and rule everything.
So Astyages tries to outsmart fate. He marries his daughter off to someone he thinks is harmless.
A minor Persian vassal, a guy named Cambyses of Anshan. The thinking was, a Persian noble from the backwoods poses no real threat.
But Mandane gives birth to a son, Cyrus, and Astyages has another dream.
This one is even more direct. A vine grows from Mandane's womb and covers all of Asia. The Magi tell him, yep, it's this kid. He's the one who will rule.
And this time, Astyages decides on a more permanent solution.
He orders the infant killed. He summons his most trusted general, Harpagus, and gives him the order.
Which puts Harpagus in an impossible position.
A terrible dilemma. He's horrified at the thought of killing a royal infant. It's impious, it's dangerous, but he's terrified of disobeying the king.
So he delegates.
He does. He gives the baby to a herdsman, Mithridates, and tells him to leave the child in the mountains to die of exposure. That way, his own hands are technically clean.
But this is where the story takes its famous twist. The herdsman's wife, Spako.
She had just delivered a stillborn baby. She sees this healthy, beautiful, royal child and begs her husband. They make the switch. They raise Cyrus as their own son and leave their own dead infant dressed in Cyrus's clothes to be found.
So the future king of the world grows up a simple shepherd's boy with no idea who he really is.
And the central theme of this whole legend is that you can't suppress true nobility will always come out.
Right, the game of kings. When the village kids are playing, Cyrus is just a natural leader. They always pick him as their king.
And he takes it seriously. One day, he orders the son of a Median nobleman to be beaten for not following his orders.
Which you can imagine did not go over well.
Huh. No. The nobleman is outraged and drags this shepherd's boy before King Astyages for judgment.
And when Astyages sees the boy, he's just struck by him, his confidence, his bearing. He knows something is wrong.
He forces the truth out of the herdsman. And suddenly, the king realizes the grandson he ordered killed is standing right in front of him.
So he goes back to the Magi, who give him this incredibly convenient out.
They tell him, look, the prophecies said he would be a king. He was king in a children's game, so the prophecy has been fulfilled. The danger's past.
And Astyages, who is desperate to believe this, accepts it. He sends Cyrus back to his real parents in Persia and thinks the problem is solved.
But he made a fatal mistake. He forgot about Harpagus, the general who had failed him.
And the punishment he gives Harpagus is one of the most monstrous things you'll ever read.
It is genuinely horrific. He invites Harpagus to a royal feast. And at this feast, he serves the general the cooked flesh of his own son.
I mean, it's just unspeakable.
After Harpagus is eaten, Astyages has the boy's head and hands brought out on a platter to show him what he's done. And what's terrifying is Harpagus's reaction.
He shows no emotion.
None. He just calmly gathers the remains of his son, goes home, buries them, and begins to plan a revenge that would take years but would bring down the entire Median Empire.
So years pass. Cyrus grows up, becomes king of Anshan, and for 6 years he plays the part of a loyal vassal to Astyages.
He's playing the long game. On the surface, he's paying tribute, being a good subordinate, but secretly he's uniting the Persian tribes, building an army, and stoking the resentment of Median rule.
And all this time, Harpagus is waiting.
He's been secretly communicating with Cyrus, promising that if Cyrus revolts, a huge chunk of the Median army, the part loyal to him, will defect to the Persian side.
Finally, in 553 BCE, Cyrus makes his move. He refuses to pay tribute.
Astyages is furious and marches out to crush this rebellion. But at the key battle, just as Harpagus promised, the Median army splits. A massive defection turns the tide.
Astyages is captured, and the Median Empire is over.
And this is where Cyrus shows what kind of ruler he's going to be. Any other king would have had Astyages tortured and executed.
But Cyrus doesn't.
He spares his life. He keeps the Median nobles in their positions. He even marries a Median princess and declares that the Medes and Persians are now one people.
It's a revolution in how you build an empire. Not on terror and destruction, but on partnership and clemency.
It was the ideological triumph of Asha, of order and truth, over the old way of tyrannical rule.
So with the Iranian plateau now united under his rule, Cyrus looks west towards the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia in modern-day Turkey.
And Lydia was, it was literally the gold standard of wealth. Its capital, Sardis, sat on the Pactolus River, which was full of gold dust. This is the origin of the King Midas legend.
And they had another major innovation, something that changed the world.
Standardized coinage. The Lydians were the first to create guaranteed stamped coins of a specific value. The Lydian stater became the world's first real currency. It revolutionized trade.
And the king of all this wealth was Croesus. He sees this new Medo-Persian power rising and gets nervous.
So he decides to consult the gods. He sends envoys to the oracle at Delphi and asks the big question, should I attack the Persians?
And he gets back one of the most infamous prophecies in all of history.
The oracle tells him, if you attack the Persians, you will destroy a great empire.
A perfectly ambiguous answer.
Absolutely perfect. And Croesus, full of confidence, hears exactly what he wants to hear. He assumes he's going to destroy the Persian Empire.
So he attacks, there's an indecisive battle, and then Croesus makes his biggest mistake. He assumes the war will stop for the winter.
Right. He retreats to Sardis and sends his allied troops home, planning to pick things up in the spring. But Cyrus was not a conventional general.
He marches his army straight through the winter and shows up at Sardis completely unexpectedly.
The Lydians scrambled to deploy their best weapon, their heavy cavalry, which was famous throughout the world.
And Cyrus counters it with one of the most brilliant and bizarre tactics ever. He uses his camels.
His pack camels. He puts them right at the front of his line. See, horses that aren't used to camels are terrified of their smell and their strange shape.
So when the Lydian cavalry charges,
Their horses just panicked. The whole charge collapses into chaos. The Lydian advantage is gone in an instant.
Croesus retreats into his citadel, which he believes is impregnable because of these sheer cliffs all around it.
But a Persian soldier sees a Lydian guard drop his helmet off the cliff and then use a secret, hidden path to go down and get it.
And just like that, the secret's out. Sardis falls.
And this leads to that crucial story, the Solon legend. Cyrus apparently orders Croesus to be burned alive on a pyre.
But as the flames are rising, Croesus cries out the name Solon 3 times.
Cyrus stops the execution and asks what he means. Croesus tells him the story of how the wise man Solon had once visited him and warned him, "Count no man happy until he is dead. Until then he is not happy, only lucky."
And at that moment, facing death, Croesus finally understands that all his wealth and power was just luck, and it had run out.
And Cyrus is so moved by this wisdom, this lesson about how quickly fortune can turn, that he spares Croesus and makes him a trusted advisor. The prophecy was right. Croesus did destroy a great empire, his own.
And just like that, the Persian Empire now stretched to the Aegean Sea, bringing it into direct contact with the Greeks for the first time.
With the West secure, Cyrus then turns his attention to the greatest prize of all, Babylon.
The heart of Mesopotamia, the city of Hammurabi and the Hanging Gardens. But in 539 BCE, Babylon was a city in crisis.
It was. Its king, Nabonidus, was deeply unpopular. He had alienated the powerful priests of the city's main god, Marduk, by promoting a different god.
And he wasn't even there, was he?
For 10 years, he was living in an oasis in Arabia, basically abandoning his duties. This created huge internal dissent.
So Cyrus found allies waiting for him inside the city.
He did. Officials who were fed up with Nabonidus saw Cyrus as a liberator, not a conqueror.
Still, Babylon should have been impossible to take. The walls were legendary.
Massive double walls, so wide you could race chariots on them, and the Euphrates River ran right through the city, giving them unlimited water and supplies for a siege that could last decades.
So Cyrus decides not to besiege it at all. He uses engineering.
A strategic masterpiece. Upstream from the city, he has his army dig huge channels to divert the flow of the Euphrates River,
Lowering the water level inside the city.
Exactly. He lowers it until it's only waist deep. And then he waits for the perfect moment.
A major festival when the city is celebrating and the guards are distracted.
His soldiers just waded into the city, under the walls, through the riverbed. The Babylonian Chronicle records the shock of it. The army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. The greatest fortress in the world fell in a single night without a fight.
And when Cyrus himself entered the city a couple of weeks later, what he did next cemented his legacy forever.
Instead of the usual looting and destruction, he went straight to the Temple of Marduk and paid his respects. He protected the citizens.
And he issued a proclamation, which we now have, on the Cyrus cylinder.
It's one of the most important artifacts from the ancient world. It's a clay cylinder. And it's basically his PR campaign. But it's propaganda for mercy.
It frames the whole conquest as a liberation, right? Saying Marduk himself chose Cyrus to save Babylon from the impious Nabonidus.
Precisely. And it lays out his new policies. He says he abolished forced labor. He returned the statues of the gods to their proper temples. And critically, he gathered up all the peoples who had been displaced by war and sent them back to their homes.
When you compare that to the Assyrian kings who bragged about how many people they'd flayed alive, it's a genuine revolution in imperial thinking.
It's a total paradigm shift. He realized that ruling through respect and restoration was far more stable and efficient than ruling through terror.
Now, some people today have called it the first charter of human rights. That's probably an exaggeration.
It is an exaggeration, yes. But it was the first time a ruler had institutionalized this idea that an empire should treat its subjects with a degree of humanity.
And of all the displaced peoples in Babylon, one group in particular would remember this act with incredible theological significance.
The Jewish exiles. You have to remember the trauma of the Babylonian exile.
Oh, yeah.
In 586 BCE, their city Jerusalem was destroyed. Their sacred temple was demolished. Their leaders were forcibly deported to Babylon.
The grief is all there in the Psalms. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept.
Their world had been shattered. And then Cyrus comes along. And in 538 BCE, he issues a decree. He doesn't just let them go home. He sponsors their return.
He tells them to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple.
And he pays for it. He funds the reconstruction from the royal treasury and returns the sacred vessels that had been looted from the temple decades before. It was a complete restoration.
The theological impact of this was just immense.
It's one of the most incredible moments in religious history. In the book of Isaiah, Cyrus is given a title that had never been given to a non-Jew. He's called Meshach, the Anointed One, the Messiah.
A Zoroastrian king is called God's Anointed One.
Yes. And the text is explicit. It says, God called Cyrus by name and equipped him for this task, though you do not know me.
So the idea was that God's power wasn't limited to one people. He could work through a righteous foreign king to achieve his divine plan.
It was a revolutionary theological leap. And it cemented Cyrus's legacy, not just as a great conqueror, but as an instrument of divine will.
So by 530 BCE, Cyrus is the king of kings, ruler of the largest empire the world has ever seen. But there was one last frontier he felt he had to secure.
The northeast, the border with the steppes of Central Asia, where there were still fierce nomadic tribes.
Specifically the Massagetae, who were led by a warrior queen named Thamyris.
Cyrus tried diplomacy first. He actually proposed marriage to her to unite their kingdoms.
And she saw right through it.
She did. She rejected him and basically told him to be content with the vast empire he already had. But Cyrus wouldn't listen.
He crossed the river into her territory and set a trap.
A clever but tragic one. He left a camp full of strong wine. The Massagetae, who weren't used to it, found the camp, got drunk, and were easily captured.
And one of the captives was Thamyris' own son.
Yes, Spartacus's. When he sobered up and realized the shame of how he'd been captured, he took his own life.
Which turned Thamyris' defiance into pure grieving rage.
She attacked Cyrus's army with what Herodotus calls desperate ferocity. And in that battle, the bloodiest he ever fought, Cyrus the Great was killed.
And the legend of what happened next is, it's grisly.
The story goes that Thamyris found his body, took a wineskin, filled it with human blood, and pushed his severed head into it, saying, I warned you I would quench your thirst for blood, and so I have.
A brutal end for a king known for mercy.
His body was eventually recovered, though, and brought back to his capital, Pasargadae. And his tomb is still there.
And it's surprisingly simple, isn't it? A small limestone chamber on a stepped base.
It is. It's very humble for a man who achieved so much. And the epitaph that was supposedly written on it captures that humility.
Oh man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Do not begrudge me this little earth that covers my body.
It's this profound acknowledgement that even the greatest power is temporary.
But maybe the greatest tribute paid to Cyrus came 200 years later from the man who conquered the empire he built.
Alexander the Great. When he reached Pasargadae, he found that Cyrus's tomb had been broken into and desecrated.
And he was furious.
Absolutely enraged. He ordered the tomb to be perfectly restored and had the guards who failed to protect it executed. Even in Conquest, Alexander recognized the greatness of his predecessor. He saw Cyrus as a worthy figure to be honored.
So let's just recap what we've seen. Cyrus unites the Medes and Persians. He conquers the world's great powers through strategic genius, and he creates the first truly multicultural world empire.
And his most revolutionary tool was his ideology. He used clemency and restoration, not terror, as the foundation of his state. The Cyrus cylinder proves that a conqueror could be more stable and effective by building up his subjects rather than destroying them.
And for you listening, what this all means is that so many of the concepts that shape our world religious tolerance, a universal morality, even our ideas of heaven and hell and a final judgment have deep roots in this period. Cyrus set a standard for leadership that echoed for centuries.
A standard that proved that power, when it's guided by a sense of order and righteousness by Asha, can actually be a force for good.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to take away. Think again about the book of Isaiah calling Cyrus this Zoroastrian, this non-Jew, the Anointed One. What does it mean for our understanding of history or even divine will when a God chooses a servant from outside its own faith to be the instrument of its people's salvation?
It suggests that the grand narrative of history is far more complex and maybe far more universal than any single perspective can ever fully contain.
Something to think about until our next deep dive. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping ourselves into the time machine and setting the dial for the late 6th century BCE. Forget what you think you know about ancient history. We are diving deep into the Achaemenid Persian Empire at its zenith. We're talking about a civilization so vast, so powerful, that the very pyramids they conquered were already 2 millennia old to them.
It's an incredible thought, isn't it?
It is. And we are looking at the foundational moments that reshaped the ancient map and really codified what a true global empire actually looked like.
That's exactly right. When we talk about the Achaemenids, we are focusing on this incredible moment where raw military conquest transforms into, well, political science.
Yeah.
It's a study and organization on a scale that had never been seen before.
And where are we going today, specifically?
Our journey today takes us from the chaotic and bloody succession that followed the death of Cyrus the Great through the incredible administrative genius of Darius I. This is the man who basically invented structured governance on an imperial scale.
Yeah.
And then we end right at the precipice. The moment the largest empire on Earth met its seemingly insignificant but surprisingly tenacious match, the independent city-states of Greece.
Right. And the sources shared with us detail this incredibly volatile transition, specifically that leap from the chaotic reign of Cambyses to the meticulous order imposed by Darius. We've got maps of their governmental structures, accounts of the royal road.
And those pivotal early conflicts in the West. Our mission really is to cut through the centuries of myth and, let's be honest, the Hellenocentric bias, to extract the surprising facts and, crucially, to connect the dots for you. How exactly did Persia manage to govern 50 million people, stretching across 3 continents, with dozens of languages and religions, all with a horse as the fastest means of communication?
And what happens when a system built on that kind of logical efficiency runs headlong into a culture driven by what seems like irrational, fierce independence? That is the story we need to unpack. Okay, so let's unpack this enormous chapter. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire, dies around 530 BCE, and the throne passes to his son, Cambyses II. Cambyses immediately sets his sights on a prize so immense, so valuable, it was perhaps the only truly worthy successor to his father's conquests, Egypt.
Egypt was, without any question, the crown jewel of the ancient world. You really have to put its age into perspective. By the time Cambyses marched in, Egyptian civilization had already accumulated 3,000 years of continuous recorded history.
That's just staggering.
It is. I mean, when we look at the Great Pyramids today, we see deep antiquity. To Cambyses, those same pyramids were already 2 full millennia old. The distance in time between Cambyses and the pyramid builders was greater than the distance between us and the Roman Empire.
It creates an almost disorienting sense of scale, doesn't it? That deep accumulated history made Egypt irresistible. It represented unimaginable wealth, centuries of treasure stored in temples, but also incredible strategic value.
Oh, absolutely. You had the guaranteed grain supply from the Nile's annual floods, which could feed millions.
Yeah.
And you had a society whose artisans and scholars preserved specialized knowledge stretching back to the dawn of history. It was the ultimate geopolitical and economic prize.
And that antiquity, that resilience, is precisely why it was so difficult to conquer and maybe more importantly, to hold on to.
Exactly. Egypt had this fiercely powerful national and religious identity. Previous conquerors like the Hyksos centuries earlier, or even the recent brief incursions by the Assyrians, they all failed to maintain permanent, lasting control. Egypt always found a way to reassert its native rule.
So Cambyses knew this. He wasn't just marching in blind.
No, he understood that conquering the land was one thing. Securing it permanently was something else entirely. And he approached it not with rashness, but with meticulous multi-year preparation, which tells us he was, at least initially, following the pragmatic, successful blueprint of his father.
Right. The sources detailed this extensive intelligence gathering on Egyptian defenses. But the key to the entire operation, it seems, was logistics and alliances.
It was everything. The Persian Empire, vast as it was primarily a land power. To invade Egypt, they needed naval supremacy. That required an alliance with the great seafaring people of the Levant, the Phoenicians. Securing the Phoenician fleets was the linchpin of the whole maritime strategy.
And on land.
Equally crucial, he negotiated alliances with the desert tribes, specifically for guidance and, most importantly, support across the vast hostile Sinai.
So the campaign itself, launched in 526 BCE, was this breathtaking feat of logistics. I mean, crossing the Sinai Desert with an army of tens of thousands, including horses and supply trains,
required thousands upon thousands of camels, all dedicated to one single purpose, carrying water. It was brilliantly executed.
and it worked.
It worked perfectly. They achieved a decisive victory at Pelusium, the gateway into the Delta. The Egyptian army, perhaps a bit demoralized and led by the young, inexperienced Pharaoh Psamtik III, was just routed. When the capital, Memphis, fell, the pharaoh was captured. By the end of 525 BCE, Cambyses had assumed the ultimate prize and was crowned as the new pharaoh of Egypt.
Initially, that transition was just flawless. Cambyses meticulously followed the blueprint set by Cyrus, that policy of inclusion and respect for local traditions.
He was trying to be the perfect foreign king, He adopted all the traditional pharaonic titles and regalia. He participated in crucial religious ceremonies. He was crowned at Sais with the ancient rites, and he even took an Egyptian throne name designed to appeal directly to the powerful Egyptian priesthood, Masudi Ra, meaning offspring of Ra.
But this initial promise of benevolent inclusion it vanishes, and rapidly. This is where the reputation of Cambyses begins its descent, largely thanks to later Greek sources, especially Herodotus.
Herodotus.
He paints this shocking picture of him transforming from a successful conqueror into a raving, impious madman.
The accusations are incredibly sensational. They're driven by drama, and they have defined his legacy ever since. The most profound sacrilege reported was the stabbing of the sacred Apis bull, the living incarnation of the god Ptah.
A huge deal for the Egyptians.
A monumental offense. Then they claimed he burned the mummy of the previous pharaoh, Amasis, which would have been an act of ultimate disrespect for their entire concept of the afterlife.
And the madness just spirals into these dynastic horrors, executing his own brother, Bardia, out of paranoid suspicion, and then marrying and murdering two of his own sisters. It's a classic laundry list of tyrannical instability.
It is. And this is exactly where we have to pause and apply some serious critical thinking, because the sources are far from neutral. How much of this is historically accurate? It is profoundly difficult to know the truth. We have to consider the source bias.
Right. So if you're an Egyptian priest, your greatest ambition is to undermine the legitimacy of this foreign and non-Egyptian ruler.
Exactly. Demonizing him, especially by accusing him of violating sacred animals and burning ancestral bodies, is the perfect narrative tool to encourage future rebellion.
And what about the Persians themselves?
And crucially, you have the propaganda of the successor, Darius. Darius needed to legitimize his seizure of power. What better way than to demonstrate that Cambyses' rule had degenerated into chaotic, illegitimate tyranny? Blackening Cambyses' name served Darius's political purposes perfectly. It makes the coup look like a divine intervention restoring order.
So regardless of whether he was clinically insane or just politically ruthless, his rule certainly degenerated into incompetence. His attempts to expand beyond Egypt ended in these spectacular military disasters.
It suggests that the logistical brilliance we saw in the Sinai crossing was completely lost. We have two major examples of this collapse of command. First, the failed expedition south against Kush in modern Sudan. That army had to turn back entirely because of a complete lack of supplies.
The sources are pretty grim on that one.
Oh, they are. They suggest the soldiers were reduced to eating their own supply animals, then their leather gear, and finally resorting to cannibalism to survive. It speaks to a massive intelligence and planning failure.
And the second story is almost mythological, the lost army of Cambyses.
A massive force of 50,000 men sent west to destroy the Oracle of Siwa, a sacred site, and more importantly, a possible center of resistance. The story is pure drama. That army was supposedly swallowed whole by a sudden, massive sandstorm, vanishing without a trace.
And people are still looking for it.
Archaeologists have been searching for that lost army for over 2,000 years. It's become this powerful symbol of imperial hubris against the unforgiving desert.
So while Cambyses was suffering these self-inflicted wounds, the real disaster arrived in 522 BCE. News from the heartland that shook the entire empire.
Yes, a man claiming to be his supposedly executed brother, Bardia, had seized the throne in his absence.
Cambyses immediately gathered his loyal forces to march east and confront the usurper, but he never made it home. He died in Syria.
And the sources give us two traditions, both equally grim. Either his sword accidentally slipped from its scabbard as he was mounting his horse, fatally wounding him in the thigh,
A freak accident.
which led to a fatal infection, or in total despair over the chaos he'd created, he just took his own life.
The result was the same, though, a profound leadership vacuum. The legitimate line of succession was fractured. The heir was dead without sons, and a possibly false king sat on the central throne. This created an era of maximum opportunity for ambitious men throughout the Persian heartland.
It threatened to shatter the entire unified empire Cyrus had built.
And this vacuum is where the true protagonist of organizational history emerges, Darius, son of Hystaspes.
He was a young nobleman, but he was certainly not next in line. He came from a cadet branch of the ruling Achaemenid royal family, a distant cousin to the main line, a relatively minor figure.
Exactly. He was just a mid-level officer in Cambyses' army. His father was merely the satrap, the governor of Parsia, region far to the east. He was fundamentally an outsider to the immediate center of power.
So how does this relatively minor figure suddenly become the king of kings?
That's the question.
He possessed three crucial assets: relentless ambition, superior intelligence, and most importantly, the political genius to gather powerful, highly placed allies among the Persian nobility at exactly the right moment.
He understood it wasn't just about force.
No, he realized that claiming the throne required more than simple military force. It required an utterly convincing, flawless narrative of legitimacy.
Which brings us to the Great Justification, the official story Darius invented and then had literally carved into stone for all eternity. His version was that the man on the throne was not the real Bardia, who was already secretly dead, but a Magian priest named Gaumata.
This narrative was indispensable. Gaumata, the story claimed, exploited his physical resemblance to the dead prince and seized power while Cambyses was occupied in Egypt. This allowed Darius to portray his actions not as a violent coup against the legitimate successor, but as a righteous act of restoration.
He was upholding the sacred concept of truth, Asha, against the lie, Drudge.
That is the cornerstone of Zoroastrian ethics. Yeah. Let's dig into that truth versus lie concept for a moment, because that is the political heart of the Behistun inscription. You're saying this wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a cosmic battle.
In their worldview, absolutely. In the Zoroastrian worldview, Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, demands Asha, which is truth, righteousness, and order.
And the opposite is Drudge.
The lie, which represents chaos, deceit, and wickedness. By framing the usurper as Gaumata, the Magian priest who embodied the lie, Darius transformed his political power grab into a divinely mandated purification.
So he becomes the champion chosen by Ahura Mazda to restore sacred order to the empire. This narrative gave him immediate, unchallengeable legitimacy among the Persian aristocracy.
But historians remain deeply skeptical of the story's convenience.
Oh, absolutely. The convenience of the real Bardia being already dead before the coup is highly suspicious. It removes the only true rival. Many historians believe Darius simply murdered the legitimate son of Cyrus, and then, after seizing power, invented the entire Gaumata story to retroactively legitimize his position.
And we'll probably never know the truth.
Without neutral contemporary accounts, we may never know the objective truth behind the assassination.
Regardless of the truth, the coup itself was incredibly dramatic. Darius gathered 6 Persian noble conspirators, 7 men in total. They forced their way into the fortress where this Gaumata was residing.
And the sources record this deadly struggle in the darkness, and Darius himself reportedly killed the impostor. He emerged at dawn and proclaimed himself king. It was a gamble of epic proportions.
And the immediate backlash was terrifying.
The empire exploded into rebellion. This wasn't a gentle transition. It was a desperate, bloody fight for survival that historians rightly call the Year of Fire.
The empire, recently expanded and now facing the succession crisis, threatened to shatter instantly into its component parts.
The scale of the crisis in 521 BCE is difficult to overstate. The Behistun inscription records that Darius fought 19 battles and defeated 9 rebel kings in that single first year. Almost every major region sees the opportunity to break away.
And these were not minor skirmishes. We're talking about major urban centers and traditional kingdoms reasserting themselves. Babylon revolted twice.
Twice. Once under Nebuchadnezzar III, and again under Nebuchadnezzar IV. Elam rebelled. Media, the former ruling power of the region, rebelled, with a man named Phraortes attempting to restore the old Median king.
It was everywhere.
Parthia, Hyrcania, Armenia, and even Persia itself revolted under a man named Vaisdata, who, ironically, claimed he was the real surviving Bardia. Darius was fighting a civil war on multiple fronts simultaneously.
For months, it truly looked like Cyrus's entire achievement would just be undone.
But Darius held on. His generals, whom he trusted implicitly, remained loyal, and one by one, through relentless campaigning, the rebellions were crushed. The inscription records this formulaically but powerfully. This is what I did by the favor of Ahura Mazda in one and the same year after I became king. I fought 19 battles. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I smote them and took prisoner 9 kings.
That Behistun inscription, carved high on a cliff face, is arguably the greatest piece of political propaganda in antiquity. It wasn't just a ledger of facts.
No, it was a carefully constructed theological and political tool designed to cement his reign through divine right. The carving's location made it almost impossible to deface. It served as this massive, permanent declaration that his power was not merely won by force, but was divinely sanctioned.
And he broadcast it. Ahura Mazda bestowed the kingdom upon me. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I hold this kingdom.
And the logistics of its display were crucial. It was carved in 3 major cuneiform scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, and copies were then sent throughout the empire, ensuring every subject, from Mesopotamia to Media, understood the official divine justification for his rule.
And this trilingual nature is why its later historical legacy is so massive.
In the 19th century, the Behistun inscription proved absolutely essential to unlocking cuneiform script, making it historically comparable in importance to the Rosetta Stone for Egyptian hieroglyphics.
But back in 520 BCE, the goal was simple: survival and political legitimacy.
Exactly. Once that was secured, Darius moved on to the monumental task of organizing the world he had fought so hard to keep.
So Darius, having survived the greatest imperial crisis in Persian history, realized that perpetual conquest and crushing rebellion were just unsustainable.
To sustain the empire, conquest wasn't enough. Organization was everything. Cyrus had been the great conqueror. Darius would be the great administrator, creating a governmental framework that influenced later empires, including the Romans.
And you have to appreciate the fundamental challenge. We're talking about an empire covering roughly 5.5 million square kilometers. That is about two-thirds the size of the continental United States. 50 million people stretching from Libya to Pakistan.
Dozens of languages, hundreds of customs, countless gods. The governing challenge was simply immense. Messages moved at the speed of a galloping horse, maybe 150 kilometers a day under ideal conditions.
So news from the far edge could take weeks or even months to reach the capital. The empire was constantly threatening to unravel just due to distance.
Darius's answer to this central logistical problem was brilliant. Divide and delegate, but maintain meticulous, centralized oversight. He divided the territory into about 20 satrapies, or provinces, each run by a royally appointed satrap.
And the title satrap itself is instructive, isn't it? It comes from the Old Persian shishathrapavan, meaning protector of the kingdom.
It is, and these men held immense power. They were responsible for collecting taxes, administering local justice according to local custom, maintaining order, and raising troops when called upon. They were, in essence, mini-kings within their territories.
But here's the fundamental problem of any large, decentralized state. How do you delegate immense power without the local governor using that power to eventually declare independence?
And that's where Darius's system of checks and balances, the core innovation, comes into play. It was a layered system designed to ensure no single individual held enough power in one place to pose a threat.
What were the main mechanisms?
We see four. First, the crucial separation of power. Military commanders in each satrapy reported directly to the king, not to the satrap.
So the satrap controlled civil policy and taxes. The general controlled the troops. If they conspired, the king would know.
Precisely. The second mechanism is perhaps the most famous and cinematic. The eyes and ears of the king.
The royal inspectors.
Yes, the Caranoi in some sources. They travel throughout the empire, often unannounced and sometimes in disguise. Their sole mission was to examine the satrap's conduct, listen to local complaints, watch for disloyalty, incompetence, or abuse, and report everything directly back to Susa. The satrap never knew when they might arrive or who might be watching. A brilliant deterrent.
Okay, that's two. What's number three?
Third, to prevent them from building deep, local power bases, satraps were routinely transferred from one province to another, sometimes across vast distances, before they could become too popular or powerful locally.
And finally,
loyalty was reinforced through family ties. Royal marriages were common, tying influential noble families directly to the central Achaemenid house, and royal princes were often assigned to key posts, ensuring the highest levels of governance had a blood connection to the King of Kings.
And this layered, complex system worked. It successfully held together the largest, most diverse empire in history for centuries.
But the system only works if the center can communicate quickly. Which takes us back to the infrastructure, the legendary Royal Road. Imagine a thoroughfare stretching 2,700 kilometers connecting Susa, the Persian political heartland, all the way to Sardis on the Aegean coast.
This road was the literal backbone of the empire's efficiency. It was equipped with 111 post stations, strategically placed every 20 to 30 kilometers a day's ride. At each station, you found fresh horses, fresh royal messengers, and supplies.
Which ensured continuous motion. Using the sophisticated relay system, the fastest messengers could cover that vast distance in just 9 days. That efficiency revolutionized command and control.
Herodotus, the Greek historian, was understandably amazed by this. He wrote that famous description.
There is nothing mortal that travels faster than these messengers. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their designated stages with utmost speed. And, as you know, that passage was adapted almost verbatim and became the unofficial motto of the U.S. Postal Service. It's a testament to the enduring brilliance of Darius's organizational model.
The Royal Road wasn't just for messages, though. It was a massive commercial highway, ensuring safe travel and facilitating trade. And critically, it was a military road, allowing troops and supplies to move at speed when rebellions threatened.
Administration also demands economic integration, and here, Darius was again revolutionary. He gave the empire a standardized professional economy by introducing a reliable, standardized bimetallic currency system based on the gold daric.
The daric was a coin weighing about 8.4 grams, minted exclusively by royal authority, featuring that iconic image of the king as an archer.
And for daily local use, there were silver segloi, set at a stable, fixed exchange rate, 1 daric to 20 segloi. The consistent quality and weight of these coins made the daric the standard currency of the entire ancient world.
Right. The joke among the Greeks was that they were defeated not by Persian soldiers, but by the Persian archers, meaning they were often bribed with Persian gold.
Exactly. And the standardization went beyond currency. He rationalized the tax system, replacing the old system of arbitrary tribute with thus regular annual payments based on each region's economic capacity. This switch from plunder to reliable revenue collection is the key insight here.
So it provided economic stability for the central empire, which could budget, and for the local satrapies, which knew what was expected.
And we know the exact amounts. Babylon paid 100,000 talents of silver, Egypt 700, and India paid a phenomenal 360 talents of gold dust. Herodotus calculated the total annual revenue at a staggering 14,560 talents of silver equivalent per year.
That colossal, reliable revenue stream funded everything: the army, the bureaucracy, and Darius's incredible infrastructure projects.
And speaking of ambition, we absolutely have to mention his precursor to the modern Suez Canal.
That is an insane undertaking for the 6th century BCE, connecting the Nile River to the Red Sea.
It was an incredible mega project. He used the empire's vast engineering expertise and resources to dig a canal that allowed ships to sail directly from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf without having to unload their cargo and transport it overland. It dramatically reduced the time and cost of maritime trade.
And he didn't just build it, he claimed it in spectacular fashion. He commemorated this monumental achievement with inscriptions in 4 languages.
Yes. One quote reads, "I'm a Persian. I ordered this canal to be dug from the river called the Nile, which flows in Egypt to the sea, which goes from Persia."
Though the canal eventually silted up and fell out of use, the achievement itself points directly toward the future. It took 19 centuries for engineers to construct the modern Suez Canal.
It shows Darius's foresight. He wasn't just planning for the next war, he was planning for a permanently connected, unified world economy.
So Darius created the administrative machine, but he also needed a stage. While Susa and Babylon managed the day-to-day bureaucracy and military command, Darius needed a center to broadcast the empire's permanent glory. That was Persepolis.
It was a site chosen with profound political and geographic care. Located in Pars, the original Persian homeland, protected by mountains near the ancestral tombs. It was purely a ceremonial capital. It was built explicitly to display the power, diversity, and prestige of the King of Kings.
Construction began around 518 BCE on this massive artificial terrace, 450 by 300 meters, carved out of the mountain itself. A project that spanned over 50 years, continuing under his successors, Xerxes and Artaxerxes I.
The scale is meant to be overwhelming. Visitors ascended via a grand double stairway, wide enough for 10 horses abreast. They passed through the Gate of All Nations, flanked by colossal human-headed winged bulls, a motif borrowed from Assyria but made distinctly Persian.
Symbolizing guardianship over all corners of the world.
Exactly. And then you had the Apadana, the Great Audience Hall. Supported by 72 columns, each 20 meters tall, it could hold 10,000 people. But the key to understanding Persian rule lies not just in the size, but in the visual language of the reliefs decorating the walls.
Right. What they don't show is the core insight. Unlike the palace art of previous empires, the Assyrians, whose walls were covered in graphic depictions of torture, mass executions, and sieges, Persepolis contains virtually no glorification of warfare or suffering.
Instead, you see a depiction of a peaceful, structured procession. Delegations from all 23 subject peoples of the empire are shown bringing their distinctive tribute. You see Babylonians leading bulls, Egyptians bringing gold rings and a giraffe, Indians with donkeys, Greeks carrying cloth.
It's a clear visual statement of Cyrus's founding policy. This is an empire of many peoples, united under Persian rule, but each delegation is depicted with dignity, their national costumes carefully rendered. The message is inclusion and orderly unity, not domination and obliteration.
For the Persian nobility who attended these annual ceremonies, life inside this empire was incredibly luxurious. The very word paradise actually comes from the old Persian word paradisa, meaning an enclosed garden.
Their estates were surrounded by these elaborate parks, not just flower beds, but orchards, pools, wild animals for hunting.
The visual spectacle extended to their personal presentation. Nobles wore magnificent clothing. Flowing robes of purple and crimson, gold-embroidered trousers, a practical Persian invention the Greeks found shocking and effeminate, and massive amounts of gold jewelry.
The King of Kings himself was surrounded by layers of spectacle and ceremony. Visitors were often required to perform proskynesis, complete prostration, a ritual Greeks found profoundly humiliating because they only reserved that level of subservience for the gods.
But the empire was run not just on spectacle, but on massive bureaucracy. We have evidence of this in the Persepolis administrative tablets, thousands of clay documents that reveal a fascinating, detailed bureaucratic state at work.
This is critical. The sources confirm that the colossal architecture of Persepolis was not built by slaves. It was built by paid laborers.
They received meticulously recorded rations of grain, wine, and beer. And remarkably for the ancient world, these records show they received benefits like sick leave, paid time off for injury, and even structured maternity leave, with their rations increasing when they were having a child.
That tells us so much about the professionalism and logistical capacity of Darius's state. It was not a state built purely on exploitation and forced labor, but on structured, paid employment and immense resource management.
And this professional workforce came from everywhere: Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, Medes, all collaborating on imperial projects. Persian culture was a vibrant synthesis, borrowing from Mesopotamian astronomy, Egyptian medicine, and Greek art.
In terms of governance, Darius maintained his policy of tolerance. Local laws persisted under imperial oversight, and Aramaic, with its simple, efficient alphabetic script, became the empire's lingua franca, the standard language of administration and trade.
This standardization, coupled with core Zoroastrian values, helped maintain social stability. Persian noble boys, according to Herodotus, were famously trained in three things essential to imperial leadership: to ride, to shoot, and to speak the truth.
One of the most surprising elements the sources reveal, particularly when you contrast it with contemporary Greek society, is the relative prominence and sometimes raw authority of Persian women.
The Persepolis tablets are crucial here again. They show female supervisors in the imperial workforce, often receiving equal or sometimes higher rations than men for equivalent work. This was an economic reality. We have records of women like Erdobama who controlled a massive estate and employed hundreds of workers.
A business empire in the 5th century BCE.
Exactly. And at the highest levels, the queens were true power brokers. Atossa, Darius's wife and Cyrus's daughter, was said to have wielded tremendous power over Darius and allegedly convinced him to name Xerxes as his heir over older sons.
Herodotus claimed, perhaps hyperbolically, that Atossa could do everything. That's a massive statement about the influence of a royal woman.
It is. And that ruthless ambition became a hallmark of the powerful women who followed. Consider Persipolis, wife of Darius II, described as cunning and utterly ruthless. She supported her favorite son, Cyrus the Younger, in rebellion. When he died, she took terrible theatrical revenge.
Greek writers were genuinely shocked by this difference. Their respectable women were largely confined to the home. They wrote, with a kind of horrified fascination, about Persian royal women attending banquets, traveling with armies, poisoning rivals, and manipulating successions.
This cultural difference is absolutely key because it sets the stage for the massive misunderstanding that led to war.
So the Persian Empire's ultimate existential challenge came not from a rival superpower, but from a seemingly insignificant collection of fractious, divided city-states on its far western edge, the Greeks.
Logically, they should have been easy prey. The Greeks had no central government, no unified army, and they fought each other constantly. Their only unity was their shared language and their deeply ingrained belief that everyone else, the Persians included, were inferior barbarians.
But they would prove to be the single enemy that the vast, methodical Persian machine could never quite fully subdue. The trouble began in 499 BCE in Ionia, the Greek cities along the Aegean coast of Anatolia.
These cities were technically Persian subjects, ruled by local strongmen, or tyrants, who were installed and backed by Persia. This flew directly in the face of the nascent freedom-loving ethos spreading across the Aegean.
And the spark was entirely accidental and self-serving. Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus, failed spectacularly in a Persian-backed expedition. Facing certain punishment, he chose desperation. He launched a massive rebellion against Persia instead.
It was a brilliant political move. He immediately laid down his own tyranny, proclaimed democracy in Miletus, and encouraged other Ionian cities to follow suit. The cry for democracy and freedom became the rallying call. But he knew they couldn't stand alone.
So he sailed to mainland Greece seeking allies.
The response from the mainland was illuminating. Sparta, the most powerful military state, was isolationist and pragmatic. King Cleomenes was shocked by the sheer distance on the map and refused.
But Athens, a relatively young, suspicious democracy, was receptive.
They were suspicious because their exiled tyrant, Hippias, was currently at the Persian court, lobbying for help to restore him to power. So Athens agreed to send 20 ships, plus 5 from Eretria. It was a minor symbolic commitment, but it changed history forever.
In 488 BCE, the Greek and Ionian forces marched inland towards Sardis, the wealthy Persian regional capital.
The attack caught the satrap, Artaphernes, completely off guard. The Greeks occupied the lower city, and then, either deliberately or accidentally, a fire started. The wooden city burned, and the destruction included the sacred temple of Cybele.
For the Persians, this was not just a military loss, it was an unforgivable sacrilege.
It demanded absolute vengeance from the King of Kings. The drama is captured perfectly by Herodotus' account of Darius' reaction. He didn't ask about the size of the Greek forces, he asked, "Who are the Athenians?"
He then shot an arrow skyward, praying to Ahura Mazda for revenge, and he commanded a servant to repeat 3 times every day before dinner, "Master, remember the Athenians."
The Ionian revolt dragged on for 6 years, but Persian resources were simply overwhelming. Athens and Eretria withdrew their support, but it was too late. Darius had them marked for destruction.
The decisive blow came at the Battle of Lade in 494 BCE.
The Ionian fleet was large, but unity failed them. Many contingents fled, including the Samians, who had made a secret deal with the Persians, causing a mass panic. After Lade, the revolt collapsed. Miletus was captured and destroyed.
But Darius had a separate score to settle. In 490 BCE, he launched a major naval expedition. The mission was explicit: punish Athens and Eretria.
The force was substantial, perhaps 600 ships carrying 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers and cavalry. They first reached Eretria. The city was betrayed, the temples were burned in retaliation for Sardis, and the population was enslaved.
The fleet then sailed across the Aegean and landed at Marathon, a coastal plain 40 kilometers from Athens, chosen specifically for their cavalry.
The Athenians, facing existential dread, decided to risk everything on a single battle. Their army was 10,000 hoplites, plus a crucial 1,000 from Plataea. They had sent a desperate plea to Sparta, but the Spartans were delayed by a religious festival. Athens was virtually alone.
For days, the armies stalemated, but then Miltiades, the Athenian commander, decided to attack, possibly because the Persian cavalry was temporarily away.
The subsequent charge was tactically revolutionary. The Greeks advanced the 1,500 meters, separating the armies at a run. It was unheard of.
They did it to minimize exposure to the Persian arrows and maximize the shock of impact.
Exactly, and the Greek formation was equally innovative. Miltiades deliberately thinned his center and massively strengthened his wings. The Persian center pushed the Greek center back, but the strong Greek wings crushed the Persian flanks.
Then the wings turned inward,
Catching the exposed Persian center in a double envelopment. Pressed from 3 sides, the Persians broke and fled toward their ships in utter disarray.
The result was stunning: 6,400 Persians killed versus only 192 Greeks. Marathon was a miraculous victory.
It was. And the psychological impact cannot be overstated. This is where the legend of Phidippides originates. The runner who raced to Athens gasped, "We have won," and died.
The Persian fleet, hoping Athens was undefended, sailed around Attica.
But the Athenian army force marched back overnight. When the Persians arrived, they saw the victorious Greek army drawn up on the shore, ready to fight again. The Persians withdrew, and the first invasion of Greece had failed. #6. The preparations for the grand spectacle.
Darius never forgot the Athenians, but he died in 486 BCE, 4 years into planning a massive new invasion. It fell to his son, Xerxes, to inherit the throne and the vengeance project.
Xerxes was about 35 when he became king. He was reportedly tall and handsome, but his character was profoundly different from his pragmatic father's. Where Darius was the administrator focused on efficiency, Xerxes was theatrical, proud, and obsessed with his imperial dignity.
He planned this invasion not just as a military necessity, but as a grand, almost religious spectacle of imperial power.
But even driven by spectacle, He was methodical. He spent 4 full years on logistics alone, a scale of preparation never before seen. Depots were established and supplies were stockpiled along the entire planned invasion route.
And the army he gathered was meant to be the largest, most diverse force in ancient history. Herodotus claimed an impossible 1.7 million fighting men, but modern estimates still place the number between 70,000 and 300,000. Still an absolutely enormous force.
The diversity alone was a theatrical spectacle. You had Persians in Medes, Assyrians in bronze helmets, Egyptians, Indians in cotton, Ethiopians wearing lion skins.
But the true measure of Xerxes' hubris lay in his engineering feats, projects designed to demonstrate that imperial will could overcome nature itself.
The first was the Athos Canal. A previous Persian fleet had been wrecked there, so Xerxes ordered a 2-kilometer canal dug straight across the peninsula, which took 3 years to complete. A massive undertaking just to avoid a storm.
The second was even more audacious. The bridges across the Hellespont connecting Asia to Europe.
They built 2 massive pontoon bridges by lashing hundreds of ships together. When the first set failed in a storm, Xerxes' reaction was legendary.
He had the sea whipped.
He ordered the sea itself whipped with 300 lashes and fetters thrown into the water to symbolically chain it as a slave. He then had the engineers who built the failed bridges beheaded. This speaks to a king driven by vengeance and spectacle over rational calculation.
And in the spring of 400 NE BCE, the crossing began. The army flowed across the Hellespont into Europe, taking 7 days and 7 nights without pause, while the great king watched from a majestic throne on the Asian shore.
To understand the coming conflict, we have to contrast the Persian military machine with the Greek phalanx. The heart of the Persian military was the immortals.
The immortals, 10,000 hand-picked soldiers, always maintained at that number. If one fell, another immediately took his place.
Persian tactics relied on mobility, overwhelming numbers, and crucially, massive use of archery to soften the enemy before the cavalry broke them, highly effective on open terrain.
But flawed against heavily armored infantry in narrow, defensible spaces.
Exactly. The Greek hoplite was the cultural and tactical antithesis. A citizen soldier with heavy bronze armor, a massive shield, and a long, thrusting spear.
His strength lay entirely in the formation, the phalanx. 8 or more ranks deep, shields overlapping, spears bristling forward, nearly impervious to frontal assault.
Arrows would just bounce off the bronze armor and interlocking shields. The phalanx was slow and vulnerable if outflanked, but in any narrow pass where flanking was impossible, it became an impenetrable killing machine.
And that is the equation that is now about to be tested. The largest, most diverse army in history, built by Darius, is now poised against a small, innovative citizen army fighting not for a king, but for independence.
It's remarkable to reflect on Darius's legacy. He was the ultimate administrator. His failure was not in administration or logistics, but in underestimating a peculiar, fractious opponent that fought with a strange, existential intensity.
Exactly. The source material ends with that collision course set. We've seen the Persian model of governance based on inclusion, efficiency, and overwhelming rational power. Now, this meticulously planned military machine is about to encounter the fierce, desperate resilience of free men who had just tasted democracy.
Darius wanted to punish Athens for setting fire to a single temple, a logical, if harsh, response. Xerxes built a continent-spanning bridge and literally whipped the sea to ensure his success. He moved from rational logistics to symbolic vengeance.
So what does it take for an empire, built on logical, methodical administration, to lose sight of rational calculation and commit to a project driven purely by the desire for spectacular personal vengeance? That question is what will define the next chapter of ancient history. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we take history's biggest moments, cinematic stories, and cultural turning points and drill down into the crucial details that define them.
That's right, and today we are setting our sights on one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known.
We're watching its dramatic final curtain fall. We've dedicated previous deep dives to the rise of Cyrus, the administrative brilliance of Darius.
And just the sheer scale of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a power that stretched across 3 continents and really defined the ancient world for over 2 centuries.
But every empire has its end. Today we are tackling the dramatic and ultimately tragic final chapter of that colossal power.
We are diving deep into the sources that detail how Persia fought desperately for its survival against the Hellenic city-states.
And then how it succumbed to this fatal internal chaos and finally met the swift, devastating force of Alexander the Great.
Our mission today is, well, it's layered. We need to understand the pivotal military moments, the moments of heroic resistance and tactical genius that repulsed that initial invasion.
Right, but we also have to analyze the deep internal flaws, the palace intrigue and the decentralized weakness that made the empire so vulnerable to an external shock.
And critically, we will explore the astonishing durability of Persian civilization itself, this cultural and governmental legacy that somehow survived military destruction.
A legacy that continues to shape our modern religious and political framework. It's an incredible story.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this and jump right into the crucible. We are setting the stage in 480 BCE, right at the climax of Xerxes' invasion of Greece.
And for the Greeks, roughly 30 city-states forming this Hellenic League, they faced an overwhelming logistical problem.
The sheer scale of the Persian forces.
Exactly. The sheer weight of that army and navy was It was too much to face an open conflict. It was an existential threat.
And the sources make it clear that the Greek commanders were absolutely paralyzed by the numbers.
Well, of course. If they fought Xerxes on an open plain, their heavy infantry would simply be flanked and completely overwhelmed.
And at sea.
Same problem. If they fought in open waters, the vast Persian fleet drawn from Phoenicia, Egypt, Ionia would just crush them through sheer mass.
So strategic genius became the only recourse. They had to find places where Persian numbers counted for absolutely nothing.
And that strategic search led them directly to one of history's most famous choke points.
We're talking, of course, about Thermopylae.
The Hot Gates, named for the natural sulfur springs nearby. Geographically, it was the perfect trap.
But let's zoom in on the geography for a moment, because this wasn't just a pass. It was a bottleneck designed by nature to neutralize a superpower. How narrow are we talking?
The pass itself was extremely narrow, a thin coastal strip where the steep cliffs of Mount Calidromo came almost down to the sea.
So there's no room to maneuver.
None. The ancient sources specify that at its narrowest point, it was wide enough for only a single wagon to pass comfortably.
A single wagon. Think about that.
It's like a garden gate trying to block a highway. This instantly rendered Xerxes' massive army, possibly numbering in the hundreds of thousands, completely irrelevant.
And it was here that King Leonidas of Sparta took his stand. He brought his famous personal guard, the 300 Spartans,
plus about 7,000 allies from the rest of the Greek cities.
Now, for anyone listening, the question is immediately, why only 7,000? Why wasn't the entire Greek force there?
It's a great question.
Did that suggest a lack of commitment from the League, or was it purely tactical?
It was a combination of factors, but it was largely tactical. It was the time of the Olympic festival and the religious festival of the Carnia, which tied up the main Spartan army.
But more importantly, the strategic plan was never for a massive army to hold the pass forever.
Exactly. It was always intended as a delaying action. They needed a force that was small enough to be sustained, but disciplined enough to exploit that geometry.
And no one was more disciplined than the Spartans.
No one. And for 2 days, they held the line against everything Xerxes could throw at them.
Let's talk about the military mechanics here, the technical balance, because this is where the advantage of Greek weaponry and formation just shines.
Absolutely. The defense relied entirely on the Greek phalanx formation, unlike the lighter-armed Persian infantry.
Whose main defense was often what? Wicker shields.
Wicker shields, leather tunics, and shorter spears. The Greek hoplite, by contrast, was essentially a walking tank.
Encased in heavy bronze armor, carrying the massive concave aspis shield, and, crucially, wielding the dory.
An 8-foot-long spear.
That spear length differential must have been devastating in that tiny space.
It was the difference between life and death. The Greek spears outreached the shorter Persian weapons, meaning the Greeks could stab repeatedly into the Persian ranks without the Persians ever being able to close the distance.
And they weren't fighting for 48 hours straight?
No, the defense was done in relays. The 7,000 allies rotated fresh troops into the narrowest point of the pass, keeping the defense constantly vigorous.
And the sources, they detail how the pass became literally choked with Persian dead, a grisly barrier impossible to cross.
The sheer drama of the Persian frustration is almost palpable in the historical accounts. Xerxes, sitting on his throne watching the slaughter.
He reportedly leaped to his feet 3 times in sheer alarm.
As wave after wave of his best infantry, including the Medes and Scythians, were just cut down.
And that desperation leads him to throw his ultimate card.
The 10,000 immortals. The elite, the symbol of Achaemenid power, so named because their numbers were immediately replenished whenever one fell.
And their failure was just as spectacular, just as complete as the others.
This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow to the prestige of the great king.
But Xerxes wasn't just relying on brute force, he was resourceful, and that brings us to the dramatic moment of betrayal.
On the second night, a Greek trader named Ephialtes arrived at the Persian camp.
And for a hefty reward, he revealed the existence of the Thermopylae path.
A secret goat track that bypassed the hot gates entirely by winding over the mountains.
The immortals, led by Hydarnes, were immediately dispatched.
And Leonidas, being an expert commander, recognized the moment of no return instantly when the scout reports came in.
The strategic position was lost. There was no winning the battle now.
The only choice left was how to die, and how much time they could buy for the rest of Greece.
And that final stand is the stuff of legend precisely because of the choice Leonidas made. He sent the vast majority of his allies away.
Right. Not just to flee, but to carry the news, to prepare other defenses in the south.
He kept only the 300 Spartans, sworn to fight to the death.
And about 700 Thespians who absolutely refused to leave their side.
He also kept 400 Thebans. Herodotus says he doubted their loyalty and basically kept them as hostages.
The focus shifted entirely from defense to glory and the purchase of time. And the sources describe the final battle as apocalyptic.
The Greeks broke their long spears, then they drew their swords.
When their swords broke, they fought with hands and teeth.
Leonidas was killed early, but the Spartans fought over his body, driving back 4 Persian counterattacks.
Before they were finally just overwhelmed by a storm of arrows and javelins.
And not a single Spartan remained alive on the field.
And Xerxes' reaction to this is chilling, but also indicative of his rage. Finding Leonidas' body, he ordered the head cut off and the torso mounted on a stake.
A vicious act of humiliation, but also perhaps a grudging acknowledgement of the ferocious courage of these free men.
And their sacrifice worked. The epitaph inscribed at Thermopylae became immortal. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie.
It bought enough time, and it established a legend of resistance that would fuel the Hellenic League moving forward.
With the pass broken, Xerxes swept south. And this brings us to the next act of revenge. The burning of Athens.
Athens, following the advice of the Oracle of Delphi, which confusingly spoke of safety behind wooden walls, had already been evacuated.
The population was ferried to the island of Salamis and the Peloponnese. Xerxes found an empty city.
But not entirely empty. A few Athenian diehards remained on the Acropolis.
Convinced the wooden walls meant the ancient defensive palisades.
The Persians breached the Acropolis, killed the remaining defenders, and then came the moment Xerxes had been anticipating for years.
Revenge. Revenge for the Greek burning of Sardis years before.
They burned the temples of the Acropolis, including the old temple of Athena. For the great king, the score was settled.
But the war wasn't decided on land. It was decided by water, which brings us to Salamis.
The triumph of Greek naval strategy.
The Greek fleet, around 370 triremes, primarily Athenian, was gathered in the narrow Strait of Salamis.
And Themistocles, the Athenian general, was the genius here.
He recognized that open water would be a slaughter, but the narrow strait offered the one scenario where Greek maneuverability and local knowledge could nullify Persian numerical superiority.
The larger, heavier Persian ships, many borrowed from foreign fleets like the Phoenicians, just could not operate effectively in that confined space.
But the alliance itself was fragile. Many Peloponnesian states, particularly Sparta, wanted to abandon the plan and sail south to defend the Isthmus of Corinth.
Essentially writing off Athens forever.
Yes. So Themistocles needed to force a battle immediately, before the League disintegrated.
And he executes perhaps the most famous strategic trick in military history.
He sends a trusted slave, Ctesias, to the Persian camp, claiming to be a turncoat with vital information.
The information being, the Greeks were planning to flee that very night.
So Xerxes needed to attack immediately to prevent their escape.
And Xerxes fell for it completely. He believed he had secret intelligence confirming Greek weakness.
That night, the Persian fleet moved to block both entrances to the strait.
And the stage was set for that ultimate cinematic detail. Xerxes had his throne carried up to a high promontory overlooking the entire strait.
Mount Agaleo. He intended to watch his navy utterly crush the Greeks and record the names of the commanders who distinguished themselves.
He wanted to witness and celebrate the total destruction of the Hellenic threat.
What he witnessed was a catastrophe. As dawn broke, the Persian fleet was lured into the confined shallow waters.
The Greek triremes, smaller, faster, and crewed by sailors who knew every current and rock, engaged.
Crucially, The Persian ships couldn't maneuver. The rear ranks, unable to see what was happening ahead, pressed forward, creating log jams and incredible chaos.
Persian ships were ramming each other as often as they were ramming the Greeks.
Meanwhile, the Greek triremes, using their bronze rams, were relentless. They targeted the bows and sides of the crowded Persian vessels, shattering oars, staving in hulls.
The Persian fleet was utterly broken.
The outcome was stark and decisive. Estimates suggest around 200 Persian ships were sunk, versus only 40 Greek ships lost.
Xerxes, watching from above, was said to have torn his robes and bitten his beard in fury and grief.
To see his mighty naval force just annihilated.
Salamis changed everything, strategically. Without naval supremacy, Xerxes couldn't supply his massive land army effectively.
Nor could he ensure a safe line of retreat across the Hellespont.
He was forced to withdraw with the bulk of his forces, leaving his general Mardonius with a picked army to continue the fight.
But that last Persian threat was annihilated at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE by the combined Greek forces.
And at the same time, the Greek fleet destroyed Persian naval remnants at Mycale.
The grand invasion had failed. Decisively.
So the invasion was repulsed, but the sources make it clear that the conflict didn't just stop in 479 BCE. It didn't end with a clean victory.
No, it just changed form. It moved from the battlefield to the treasury.
And that's a critical distinction. For the next 30 years, the conflict continued sporadically, but the balance of power shifted.
Athens, suddenly flush with naval power and reputation, formed the Delian League.
Which demanded tribute from its allies.
Right. In reality, this league quickly morphed into a coercive Athenian empire.
And Athens took the offensive. They prosecuted an aggressive war against Persian territories, liberating Greek cities in Ionia and raiding Cyprus and Egypt.
They had some major military successes, too. It shows their growing confidence. The Battle of Eurymedon in 466 BCE is a perfect example.
That's where the Athenian general Cimon achieved a double victory.
Destroying Persian fleet and the accompanying land army in a single devastating day. They captured 200 ships.
So it looked, for a time, like the Greek city-states were capable of dismantling the Persian Empire piece by piece.
But the Persian Empire was massive, rich, and above all, resilient.
Athenian resources, while impressive for a city-state, were finite.
And that fundamental disparity between a city-state and a continent-spanning empire led to catastrophic overreach.
The disastrous expeditions sent to support an Egyptian revolt against Persian rule around 454 BCE.
Athens invested heavily, sending maybe 50 ships and their crews. It ended in utter disaster in the Nile Delta, with nearly the entire force wiped out.
The lesson was harsh but undeniable, wasn't it?
Completely. The Greek city-states did not possess the necessary resources for a sustained war of attrition against the massive, deep resources of the Achaemenid Empire.
This realization led directly to the Peace of Calais in 449 BCE.
The official end of the wars. On paper, it guaranteed the autonomy of the Greek cities in Asia Minor and kept Persian warships out of the Aegean.
But the hidden message, the tacit acknowledgement, was profound.
It confirmed Persia's permanent control of the Asian mainland. The Greeks were forced to recognize that boundary.
And this marks the great strategic change.
Persia realized that direct military conquest had failed, but diplomacy and gold offered a much more effective path to dominance.
So the Persian king went from being a military threat to being a puppet master, operating entirely off the battlefield.
Exactly. The moment the unifying threat of Persia disappeared, the Greek city-states instantly resumed their habitual petty conflicts. Athens versus Sparta versus Thebes.
A perfect opportunity to weaponize Greek division.
And the sources show that Persian gold began to flow freely. It was a conscious state-level policy.
Persian ambassadors appeared everywhere, offering massive subsidies, making promises, playing one side against another.
During the massive conflict known as the Peloponnesian War, Persia almost exclusively subsidized Sparta.
That's incredibly ironic. Sparta, the land power, the ideological rival to the Persian king, accepted massive amounts of gold to build a fleet.
A fleet capable of defeating Athenian naval supremacy. It was pure political pragmatism.
Persian gold bought them the wood, the oarsmen, the supplies to finally defeat Athens.
But once Sparta won and became too dominant, a new regional threat, Persia simply switched sides, supporting a coalition against Sparta.
This manipulation culminated in a staggering diplomatic reversal known as the King's Peace, or the Peace of Antalcidas, in 387 BCE.
The irony here is absolutely profound. Sparta, now facing a coalition subsidized entirely by the very Persian treasury they had relied on.
Agreed to a treaty that formally ceded the Greek cities of Asia Minor back to Persia.
The autonomy won by the heroism at Marathon and Salamis was completely given away at the negotiating table, signed off by the Spartan king himself.
So Persia regained through diplomacy everything it had lost in battle.
The great king had failed to impose his will through invasion, but succeeded through financial coercion. For the next 50 years, Persian kings effectively acted as the arbiters of Greek affairs.
Whenever the Greeks threatened Persian interests, a messenger would arrive with a sack of gold, ensuring they'd be instantly distracted by fighting each other.
The proud victors of Salamis had become effectively Persian clients, unable to manage their own affairs without the great king's financial intervention.
It's a fascinating pivot, showing the strategic depth of the Achaemenid Empire. But while Persia was busy manipulating the Greeks with gold, the core of the empire itself was suffering from severe internal rot.
This is the fatal flaw. This is what allows Alexander to succeed later. The dynasty following Xerxes was marked by almost continuous palace intrigue and deeply contested successions.
The source material is brutally honest. After Xerxes, violence became the default method of succession.
Xerxes himself was assassinated in 465 BCE by his own guard captain, Artabanus.
And when his successor, Artaxerxes I, died in 424 BCE, the chaos it reached a new level of bloodiness.
It was a total institutional failure. His heir, Xerxes II, was assassinated after just 45 days.
The killer, Sogdianus, was then himself killed 6 months later by another half-brother, who became Darius II.
This pattern brother, murdering brother, short reigns, regicide became frighteningly common. It signals a severe weakness at the very top of the empire.
And Darius II's 19-year reign, despite all this, was dominated by one of the most remarkable and ruthless figures in Persian history.
His wife and half-sister, Queen Persepolis.
She was a true force of nature, ambitious and highly influential. She successfully restored Persian influence in the Aegean through shrewd manipulation.
But her dedication to her favored younger son, Cyrus the Younger, ultimately brought disaster.
When Darius II died in 404 BCE, Persepolis tried to install Cyrus on the throne instead of the legitimate heir, Artaxerxes II.
She failed. But Cyrus was too capable and ambitious to accept being merely a provincial governor, a satrap.
This failure leads to the fateful March of the 10,000.
Cyrus the Younger raised a formidable army, which crucially included 10,000 highly trained Greek mercenaries, and marched deep into the heartland of the empire against his brother.
They met at the Battle of Canaxa in 401 BCE. The Greek mercenaries proved their worth, routing the Persian forces facing them.
But Cyrus, driven by impatience, charged directly at his brother's position and was killed in the fighting.
So the immediate objective failed, but the lesson learned by the Greeks was transformative.
And, ultimately, lethal to the Achaemenid Empire. The 10,000 Greeks were stranded thousands of miles from the sea, deep in hostile territory.
But they fought their way home. An incredible journey recorded by their commander Xenophon in his famous work, the Anabasis.
And what the Anabasis proved, beyond Greek fighting capability, was that the illusion of Persian impenetrability was shattered.
It demonstrated two things clearly, right?
Yes. First, that a relatively small, disciplined Greek army could penetrate the Persian heartland almost at will.
And second, that the Persian central army was disorganized and unable to coordinate effectively against a unified professional force.
This was a blueprint for invasion that future ambitious leaders, notably in Macedon, would certainly not forget.
Meanwhile, the sheer size of the empire was proving to be a vulnerability. Artaxerxes II ruled for 46 years, but stability remained elusive.
That's the structural issue. The Achaemenid system, based on satrapies, was designed to allow local autonomy, which worked for inclusion.
But it also gave enormous personal power to the governors. These satraps raised their own militias, collected taxes.
They essentially functioned as local kings. And this decentralization often led to chronic instability.
And we see that vulnerability exploited during the Great Satraps Revolt in the 360s BCE.
Precisely. This wasn't a single revolt. It was a simultaneous uprising involving the satraps of Lydia, Mysia, Lycia, and Caria, virtually the entire western frontier.
It revealed the central government's struggle to maintain control.
And though it was suppressed, it required massive resources and years to put down, further exposing the empire's fundamental fragility.
And we can't forget Egypt, which exploited this chaos after the death of Darius II, maintaining its independence for a remarkable 60 years.
Despite repeated and expensive Persian attempts to reconquer it, Persia was, in short, a giant struggling with chronic internal hemorrhaging, just as a new unified threat was forming in the West.
This spiral of instability finally leads us to the last great Achaemenid king before the fall, Artaxerxes III.
He seized the throne in 358 BCE, but only after ruthlessly murdering most of his brothers and relatives to ensure he had no succession challengers.
A terrifying figure, but ruthlessness often breeds competence in history. He seemed to be stabilizing the empire, didn't he?
He was incredibly capable. He crushed revolts in the Levant and, in a monumental effort in 343 BCE, successfully reconquered Egypt, ending its 60 years of independence.
He restored central authority through sheer force of will and terror. It seemed like he had brought genuine stability back to the Achaemenid realm.
And then he was poisoned in 338 BCE by his own powerful vizier, the eunuch Bagoas.
This just underscores the endemic palace intrigue that plagued the later Achaemenids.
Bagoas, tired of his forceful master, replaced him with a puppet, Artaxerxes IV. When that puppet attempted to assert independence, Bagoas killed him too.
He almost exterminated the entire Achaemenid royal family.
It was a complete institutional failure, demonstrating that the ultimate power rested not with the king of kings, but with the chief schemer in the palace.
It's mind-boggling that the fate of the world's largest empire was decided by a power struggle between a eunuch and a puppet king.
In 336 BCE, Bagoas installed a distant cousin of the royal line, who took the throne as Darius III.
Darius was reportedly a brave soldier and a decent man, but utterly unprepared for the storm brewing to the northwest.
He did display a cunning of his own, though. He managed to turn the tables on Bagoas, forcing the eunuch to drink the very poison he had used against others.
The ultimate revenge. But in that very same year, 336 BCE, far to the northwest, Alexander inherits the throne of Macedon.
And more importantly, he inherits his father's detailed plans to invade Persia, a catastrophic coincidence of fate that Darius III could not survive.
Alexander's conquest was a lightning-fast blitzkrieg. It took just 4 years and 3 decisive battles to tear down an empire that had stood for over 2 centuries.
Let's track that progress. First, the Granicus River in May 334 BCE, a victory over local satraps, but it was decisive in opening up Asia Minor entirely.
The local Persian commanders completely underestimated him.
And that quick victory allowed Alexander to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor, removing Persia's naval recruiting grounds and turning them into his base of support.
Then came Issus in November 333 BCE. This was the first time Alexander met Darius III and the main royal army.
The stakes were enormous. Darius had chosen the ground poorly, a narrow coastal plain that, ironically, minimized his massive numbers.
A lot like Thermopylae had done for the Greeks.
Exactly. The fighting was desperate. Alexander's horse was killed under him, but the Macedonian cavalry charge, personally led by Alexander, broke through directly toward Darius's position.
And this is the key turning point, the beginning of the end. Darius fled the battlefield.
Yes, he abandoned his army, his treasury, and crucially his mother, wife, and children who were taken captive.
That flight just shattered the morale of the Persian forces. The King of Kings, supposed to be the embodiment of courage, his survival instinct just took over.
Darius offered peace, a massive ransom, half the empire, and his daughter in marriage. Alexander refused.
That legendary exchange perfectly encapsulates Alexander's mindset. His general, Parmenion, allegedly said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept."
And Alexander's reply was sharp and confident. So would I if I were Parmenion. He wasn't negotiating. His aim was total, universal conquest.
So Alexander takes a strategic detour, conquering the Mediterranean coast and Egypt to secure his rear, before turning back east for the final confrontation.
That final stand came at Gaugamela in Mesopotamia, October 1st, 331 BCE. Darius gathered absolutely everything he had left.
Estimates suggest well over 100,000 soldiers, including elite troops from the far eastern provinces and those much-feared scythed chariots.
Which failed spectacularly. The Macedonians, disciplined and prepared, simply opened their ranks to let the chariots pass harmlessly through.
Then they just sealed the ranks and slaughtered the horses and drivers trapped behind them.
Alexander again targeted Darius's position, and for the second time, Darius broke and fled.
Not stopping until he reached the eastern provinces, abandoning his army and his capital for good.
The sources are absolutely clear. Gaugamela ended the Achaemenid Empire. The great cities and their treasures now lay open to the conqueror.
With Darius in flight, Alexander marched straight into the administrative and ceremonial centers of the empire. He entered Babylon and Susa without resistance.
And the treasures seized were just unimaginable. 50,000 talents of silver in Susa alone. equivalent to decades of revenue for a Greek city-state.
But the symbolic and financial heart of the empire was Persepolis. This was the city of Darius the Great, the ceremonial capital.
Persepolis held the accumulated wealth of 2 centuries of tribute and trade, 120,000 talents of silver, plus staggering amounts of gold, jewelry, precious objects.
The sources state that Alexander required 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels just to carry the wealth away.
It redefined what wealth meant in the ancient world.
Before removing the treasury, Alexander allowed his soldiers to plunder the city for days, the normal horror of an ancient sack.
It was standard practice for the time, unfortunately. But the next step was not standard. In May 330 BCE, Alexander burned the magnificent palaces of Persepolis.
This action remains one of the most debated and dramatic moments in ancient history, and the sources offer competing yet equally compelling explanations.
The first explanation, and the one that fits Alexander's public persona, is cold, deliberate revenge.
The Greek counterstrike, 150 years overdue, for Xerxes burning the temples on the Acropolis in Athens.
By destroying the symbolic heart of the Persian world, Alexander was declaring the end of the Persian threat and balancing the scales of vengeance for Hellenic civilization.
But the second explanation is far more chaotic and human. It gives us a window into the darker side of Alexander's personality.
A drunken revel. This is the dramatic anecdote recorded by Clitarchus. The story claims that Alexander, deep in a banquet, was incited by an Athenian courtesan named Thais.
She urged him to put the torch to the palace as the ultimate act of humiliation against Persian pride.
And the sources say Alexander seized a torch and led the destructive party himself.
And the third explanation suggests immediate regret.
Some accounts claim that almost as soon as the fire began, Alexander ordered it extinguished, realizing the cultural and symbolic vandalism he had committed, but it was too late.
Whatever the true motivation, revenge, drunken impulse, or a mix of both, the flames consuming Persepolis sent an undeniable message across the ancient world.
The Achaemenid Empire was permanently, officially dead.
But the king was still alive, Darius III was running, and Alexander, showing his characteristic relentless speed, pursued him across the vast eastern territories.
He covered immense distances. Accounts suggest he chased Darius 400 miles in an astonishing 11 days, driving his men and horses to their absolute limit.
When Alexander finally caught up, the final tragedy had already unfolded. Darius was found dead, murdered not by his enemy, but by his own men.
Yes, he was betrayed. Bessus, the powerful satrap of Bactria, and Nabarzanes, the royal guard commander, had seized the fleeing king.
As Alexander's advance guard approached, they stabbed Darius and left him dying by the roadside.
They effectively turned on their master, hoping to use his death as a bargaining chip, or perhaps to seize control of the eastern provinces themselves.
The final legendary words attributed to Darius III are incredibly poignant, aren't they? A Macedonian soldier found him still alive.
The dying king allegedly asked the Macedonian for water, lamenting that his final misfortune was being unable to repay kindness, while trusting Alexander to reward the soldier and treat his family with honor.
A tragic, lonely end for the King of Kings. And Alexander's reaction to finding his great rival murdered is crucial to understanding his own ambition.
Absolutely, he wasn't pleased. Alexander had Darius's body sent back to Persepolis for a full royal burial with honors.
This wasn't merely respect for the man, it was respect for the institution of kingship.
Exactly. By burying Darius as a king, Alexander positioned himself as the legitimate, rightful successor to the Achaemenids, not merely a barbarian conqueror.
He then spent 2 years relentlessly hunting down the regicides, showing that you do not kill a king and survive the act, even if that king was his enemy.
He was establishing his own legitimacy over the lands he had conquered.
So the military story ends with Alexander standing as the king of Asia, atop the ashes of Persepolis. But the sources make it crystal clear that the Achaemenid Empire's influence and culture lasted far longer than its 220-year span.
The irony is so powerful. Alexander's empire fragmented almost immediately after his death in 323 BCE.
His generals fought for the pieces, and the Seleucids, who inherited the vast territory of the East, attempted to Hellenize the Asian peoples, to impose Greek culture, language, and civic structures.
And they failed. The Iranian identity proved far more durable than Macedonian steel.
Greek culture took root in the cities and military settlements, but it never penetrated deeply into the Persian countryside.
The Iranian peoples reasserted themselves in a series of powerful successor empires, proving that the Achaemenid defeat was a change in dynasty, not a destruction of civilization.
First came the Parthians, starting around 247 BCE. They explicitly revived many Achaemenid traditions.
Most famously adopting the ancient title of King of Kings Shahanshah, a direct callback to Cyrus and Darius, signaling their continuity with the past.
Then the Sasanians, beginning in the 3rd century CE, they went even further, explicitly presenting themselves as restoring the Persian Empire.
Using the memory of the Achaemenids as a foundation for their state, they codified Zoroastrianism as a state religion and engaged in eternal wars with Rome.
And that pride in Achaemenid lineage was manifest. We have the striking example of the Sasanian king Shapur capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian in 260 CE.
A monumental triumph carved into the rock faces of Iran, a boast of Persian strength that would have made Xerxes incredibly proud.
And even after the Islamic conquest in the 7th century, the cultural thread remained unbroken. The Arabic conquerors were absorbed into Persian culture as much as they transformed it.
Persian became the literary language of the Islamic world, producing greats like Ferdowsi, Rumi, and Hafez, ensuring that Iranian identity and culture were transmitted and preserved.
That continuity is astonishing. Let's look at the specific, actionable contributions of the Achaemenids that still shape our world today, starting with governance.
The system of satrapies and the general model of Achaemenid governance were revolutionary. It wasn't just an ancient administrative trick, it became the blueprint for administering large, diverse empires.
The Romans studied it when structuring their own provinces, and modern states still wrestle with the core problem Darius solved.
How do you delegate authority over vast distances while maintaining effective central control? It's a fundamental challenge of federalism in imperial administration.
Then there's infrastructure. The Royal Road, extending over 1,600 miles from Sardis to Susa, pioneered the concept of state-maintained transportation and communication systems.
The idea that government should invest heavily in standardized roads, way stations, and courier systems to facilitate commerce and information transfer, that traces back directly to Persian innovation.
And economically, they created an integrated world market. Standardized coinage, the gold derrick, and interconnected trade networks brought unparalleled prosperity across 3 continents.
But perhaps the most profound and often overlooked legacy lies in religion. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian faith, profoundly influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
This is a massive connection. Concepts we consider foundational to Western theology, the sources suggest owe much to Persian religious thought.
Absolutely. Think about the core tenets of Zoroastrianism. The cosmic struggle between the supreme benevolent deity, Ahura Mazda, and the malevolent spirit, Ahriman.
This dualistic framework, the idea of an eternal moral struggle between good and evil, gave rise to key theological developments.
Specifically, the Jewish concept of Satan, a pure embodiment of evil, and the Christian concepts of heaven and hell, along with resurrection and final judgment.
How exactly did these concepts enter Jewish thought?
Primarily during the Babylonian exile. Following the destruction of Jerusalem, the Judeans were transplanted to Babylonia, which became part of the Persian Empire after Cyrus conquered it.
They were exposed to Persian religious ideas for half a century.
And when Cyrus liberated the Jews and allowed them to return home, a revolutionary act of tolerance, they carried back with them syncretized Zoroastrian ideas, including this sophisticated dualism and eschatology.
And let's not overlook the Magi. The word magic itself derives from the Zoroastrian priestly caste.
The wise men from the East, mentioned in the Gospels, visiting the Christ child, were almost certainly Magi Zoroastrian priests who saw cosmic significance in the stars. That links Persia, intellectually and symbolically, directly to the Christian nativity story.
Beyond religion and governance, we look at the revolutionary concept of human rights and tolerance. Cyrus's policy, famously articulated in the Cyrus Cylinder, was groundbreaking.
To appreciate why it was revolutionary, you must compare it to what came immediately before, the Neo-Assyrian empires,
who ruled through mass deportation, terror, and boasts of cruelty pyramids of severed heads, flaying captured leaders alive.
A truly terrifying model of power. Contrast that with Cyrus, who conquered Babylon and immediately published a proclamation, the cylinder boasting of his mercy and respecting the local god Marduk,
allowing displaced populations, like the Jews, to return home and rebuild their temples.
The Persians demonstrated that a vast, diverse empire could be held together by inclusion and respect, rather than just terror.
That is the enduring model of the universal empire. Alexander recognized this too. He didn't try to wipe the Persian slate clean.
He absolutely adapted. He utilized Persian infrastructure, adopted Persian administrators, and even started wearing Persian dress. He understood that Persian civilization was too sophisticated and too valuable to simply destroy.
His new Hellenistic empire was structurally and administratively Persian, but with a Macedonian ruler on top.
And that unbreakable thread extends all the way to modernity. Modern Iran remains deeply conscious of this ancient heritage. The Cyrus cylinder is a national symbol.
And perhaps the most remarkable continuity is now Rus, the Persian New Year.
Originally a Zoroastrian spring festival, it is still celebrated across vast regions, surviving conquests, revolutions, and religious shifts. A cultural durability that is truly rare across 25 centuries.
The aesthetic of imperial grandeur, Persian poetry, the concept of the paradise garden, even the word bazaar, these are indelible Persian contributions that persist today.
They really are.
So, we have traced the Achaemenid Empire's dramatic conclusion, from the heroism of its enemies at Thermopylae and Salamis, through the deep internal collapse fueled by palace intrigue, and its dramatic, fiery end at the hands of Alexander the Great.
And we finish with that powerful paradox. While the Persian state was militarily defeated and politically destroyed by Macedonian steel, Persian culture, law, and religious thought proved far more resilient.
The concept of the universal empire, integrating diverse peoples under a rule of relative tolerance, was something the Persians pioneered.
When we look at the core challenge facing the world today, how diverse peoples and cultures can live together in peace under shared, successful institutions, we are drawing on a vision the Persians pioneered millennia ago.
The belief that power must serve justice, not just self-interest, remains its ultimate contribution.
I think so.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward from this deep dive. 25 centuries ago, a Persian king inscribed this declaration. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I am of such a sort that I am a friend to right. I am not a friend to wrong. What is right, that is my desire.
Is the belief that power should serve justice, that foundational moral claim, the true and unbroken thread connecting the age of Cyrus and Darius to our own world?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.